So you guys got a little bit of an introduction of who I am. I want to get a sense of who you are so I can kind of direct a presentation based on what your needs might be. So can I get a show of hands of how many people in here own their own wellness business? How many people are in worksite wellness? Okay. How many people have clinical backgrounds? Nurses, doctors? Okay. So let me ask this question. How many people are interested in starting a wellness business? Okay. Okay, so today's session is preparing for your role in the preventive and lifestyle medicine movement, opportunities, ethics, and confidentiality. If there's any section that you want us to spend a little bit more time on, just let me know, because I want to make sure that when you leave here, you got what you came for. So just stop me and say, hey, can you expand on that a little bit more? If it's something that I might be spending a bit too much time on, give me an indication of that as well. Okay, today we're going to talk a little bit about the wellness industry, lifestyle medicine, law, ethics, and confidentiality. And the reason why I usually start my presentations with just an overview of the industry, because I think it's important for you to get a sense of how broad the wellness industry is, because it starts to spark ideas around what are the things you can do, where can you collaborate, and where is there synergy. Okay, so the wellness industry is estimated, and this is a conservative estimate, to be worth $1.9 trillion globally. Does anybody know what $1 trillion is? Huh?
1,000 billion.
I read something, and I forget the congressperson was speaking and said that if you spent $1 million a day, it would take you 300 years to spend $1 trillion. So just to get a sense of what the industry is worth, because a lot of times when we start talking about numbers, that's kind of outside of our normal daily spending or budgets, they're just numbers. But to me, this is a really, really big number, which says there's a very big pie, and it's just a matter of us deciding how much of that pie do we want to claim for ourselves. One of the other things, I know a lot of people who join the wellness industry, they join it because they have a good heart and they want to do good, and I think that's all good. But also, I think that there's a lot of money in the industry. And so if you're interested in doing good, in making money, this is a great industry to be in. And so the whole concept of there's evil in money, I've disregarded that concept. So if that's where your mindset is, I think you have to first work on that, because you can do good and enjoy life and be wealthy. And there are a lot of things that money will buy you, even though money does not buy you happiness. I will have to say that I've had some pretty happy experiences as a result of having money to go different places and do things. The largest part of the industry is the beauty and anti-aging. I'm sure all of you see all the commercials on television about how to stay young and how to be beautiful. This is the largest sector of the wellness industry. Fitness and mind and body is the second largest, and healthy eating and nutrition and weight loss is the third. Worksite wellness is actually the smallest segment of the wellness industry. And health coaching was not even called out as a separate sector. So health coaching is actually incorporated in the worksite wellness industry, which to me says there's a lot of opportunities there. And the reason why I believe that you don't see large numbers there is because this sector has not accepted that it's okay to make money out of it, where the other sectors have seen the business opportunity in the wellness industry. Okay. There's been a tremendous growth over the last 10 years in the industry, and some of the reasons behind the growth is, one, the baby boomers. We're getting older, I'm one of them. We're getting older, but we're not accepting that we're getting older. Which is different from other generations. Other generations have gotten older, but they accepted it. They thought this was okay. You know, you're a certain age, you're going to get the aches, you're going to get the pains, and it's okay. Now, the baby boomers have said we have refused to get old. We start saying things like 40's the new 30. You know, we're joining health clubs. We're buying those anti-aging products. And we recognize the illnesses that our parents suffered, and we don't want to be a part of it. We want to look young. We want to feel young. We want to enjoy life. And so this group of baby boomers is really increasing the demand in the wellness industry. Generation X, the generation below the baby boomers, are a generation that kind of grew up in wellness, and so they are expecting it more. The thing is that they do want a little bit of variety in their wellness. So for the fitness industry, they're having to be a little bit more creative because people don't want just fitness. They want fitness that is exciting. And so you see a lot more of the adventure type fitness, the functional training. The people are doing more exciting things. They're not just going to the gym anymore. Plus, despite all this focus on wellness, we're sicker than we've ever been as a nation. And because of the awareness of all of the chronic diseases, people are now saying they want to prevent getting these diseases, or they want to minimize the impact of it, reduce the symptoms of some of the chronic diseases that we're told are non-curable, like diabetes and high blood pressure, these things that we think that we have to accept. So the generations now are saying we're sicker than we've been, but we don't want to be. And so this is all increasing the demand in the wellness industry. Plus you have a really different environment now. You have the First Lady with her Let's Move campaign, which is given a lot of attention on physical activity. There's a lot of new legislation out there, including the Affordable Care Act, that has some provisions that we'll talk about later that relate to wellness. Media, there's all kind of shows now. Has anyone seen The Doctors? Anybody watch it? Dr. Oz. Plus, there's a host of cooking shows now that focus on how to make meals healthier. So this is all increasing their awareness around wellness. Then we have our charismatic personalities, the Oprahs, the Tony Robbins. They're all out there, and they are communicating this message of wellness, and it is multiplied because of social media. So we have a lot more information being disseminated, a lot more promotion around wellness. When I did my business plan for my fitness center, I said it's one of the few industries where everybody else markets for you. Because it's all on the commercials, the government is marketing it, recommending physical activity. So it is an industry that there are a lot of champions out there, which is creating this big rise in the industry. Any questions about anything I've said so far? Interesting comments? Okay, lifestyle medicine, which is what we're going to be primarily talking about today. What are the opportunities in lifestyle medicine? Does anybody know what lifestyle medicine is? Anybody? Good, everybody's here to learn. Okay, well, lifestyle medicine is the integration of lifestyle into traditional medical practices. So you have a whole movement now of physicians that are focused on lifestyle medicine. They are apparently just beginning to make the connection between exercise and health and nutrition and health. And for those, some of you who are in the industry, in the clinical field, you might know that doctors actually don't. In medical school, I think they have maybe one course in nutrition. So it's not a focus. And they don't spend a lot of time with their patients traditionally. So there's no emphasis on exercise, and there's no emphasis on diet. It's primarily focused on prescription medication. There's been a whole movement to change this. I went to do a certification that was sponsored by Harvard Medical School. I was probably one of the few non-clinicians in the group. But I went because I wanted to understand the language that they were speaking. And so there were a group of doctors there that were discussing lifestyle medicine, discussing exercise is medicine. They were talking about things such as these, what do you call them? Shared medical appointments. Anybody familiar with shared medical appointments? Okay. So physicians are now taking groups of patients that have common conditions and putting them in groups. So rather than seeing them individually, they're seeing them in groups. So they may have a group of 10 patients. And what they figured out is that they can spend quality time, have an hour, hour and a half session with 10 patients. And those 10 patients are now getting an hour and a half of the physician's time, as opposed to 10 minutes each. And what it is allowing the physicians to do, it's allowing them to bill for each patient that's in the group, because they do some individual stuff. The nurse still does all the preliminary stuff, taking the weight, the height, the blood pressure, all that's done. They go into the groups. What they found was that it's actually been pretty successful, because the patients actually assist other patients with medication compliance, because they say, oh yeah, I took that. And in 2 days, I was sleeping better. I started feeling the reduction in my pain. Oh, I started walking, and when I started walking, I immediately started feeling better. So it has more credibility coming from someone who has the condition than coming from the physician. So what has happened is that there's been this whole movement now in the medical industry to incorporate lifestyle medicine into their practices. And one of the ways that they're doing it is with these shared medical appointments, because they get this hour and a half. They can talk more around the other things, the exercise, the diet. The patients can ask questions. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. I have two definitions up here, which I'm not going to read. One is from the Lifestyle Medicine Initiative, and the other definition is the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. Okay. It includes diet, exercise, stress management, smoking cessation, and a variety of other non-drug modalities. Okay. Today is used for both prevention as well as treatment of a lot of chronic conditions. Okay. So I know one of the things is that I mentioned in the description is that we were going to talk about some of the opportunities that this whole lifestyle medicine movement presents. So I listed some of the things that I saw as potential opportunities. One is in complementary services. I hear a lot of commercials. I don't know where you live and if you hear the commercials for the cancer, I think it's the Cancer Institute of America. Anybody hear those commercials? Okay. They talk a lot about complementary medicine. So they said we don't just treat the cancer patients in the traditional ways, but we incorporate a lot of complementary medicine into that treatment. And complementary medicine can mean acupuncture, it could mean acupressure, reflexology. It's also things like art therapy. It's wellness coaching, but there's a lot of things that fall in the area of wellness that is incorporated with the complementary medicine that they're offering. And you'll see this for some other chronic diseases as well, but I know that for cancer, it's used a lot. It's used while patients are taking their chemotherapy. And also, there's a whole movement now to include family members and caregivers in some of the wellness services. So they offer wellness services to family members and caregivers. And the theory behind that is that you have to keep the caregivers strong. And if anybody has ever dealt with a family member going through a chronic condition, it can be very, very stressing on the family member, or if you worked in the industry and seen it with patients, but it can take a toll on the family members. And so this care is now being extended to caregivers as well. So there's a host of wellness services as well that can be offered to family members. Disease management. There are so many chronic conditions that can be managed through wellness services, whether it's exercise, nutrition, lifestyle coaching, and things such as diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and a lot of physicians are now looking to incorporate some level of disease management into their practices. The problem is they don't have time to do it, which presents opportunities for us in the wellness industry to be able to partner with them. Smoking cessation as well. Moderating alcohol consumption. Those are two areas where they can either cause illnesses or aggravate existing illnesses. And so the physicians are now looking and saying, how do we help improve the outcome by reducing smoking and alcohol? There's the health risk assessments that a lot of physicians are now incorporating into their practice. Some of them were incorporating them, health risk assessments, before the enactment of the Affordable Care Act. But the Affordable Care Act actually has a provision in it now that for Medicare, Medicare is now paying for one annual wellness visit. The statute is very prescriptive as to what needs to be included in that wellness visit. And included in it is that there has to be a health risk assessment. And it defines what is a health risk assessment. Does everybody know what a health risk assessment is? Okay. So it defines what should be included in a health risk assessment. It also has to include a wellness plan. So the patient has to leave there with an actual plan. And the physician also has to do referrals. So if the plan says something with relationship to smoking and reducing, quitting smoking or reducing alcohol consumption, the physician's plan needs to do a referral to some individual or organization that can assist with this. So the plan might call for increased exercise. It may call for nutritional counseling. Now, what's not clear about the Act, and I've been in the regulatory area in healthcare for a number of years, and what I do know is that a lot of times there's legislation that comes out without a lot of guidance around it. And then there's the implementation, there's all the problems around it, then we get additional guidance. So what I've gathered from reading the statute is that physicians will definitely be paid if they conduct annual wellness visits. You have some other what they call qualified practitioners that will also be paid. As certain nurses will also be paid. Then they have this category of team members, which they don't define who those team members are, if they're operating under the direction of a physician. They can also be paid. So it's not clear whether or not wellness coaches, I think there's certainly a big argument that wellness coaches fits in that team member, because there's so much in the Affordable Care Act that says that wellness plans are an essential part of treatment. There's a lot of studies with the CDC that says the same thing, that you cannot have an effective treatment plan without wellness. It's a critical component of health. So I think that we probably will be fitting underneath this team members. There's some suggestion that programs like smoking cessation classes can be conducted off-site. They don't have to be conducted in the physician's office. What I'm not clear on is how the wellness coaches will bill. And if any of you have ever been involved in any medical billing, it's not a simple thing. So when you say, okay, there's an opportunity here that we can now bill Medicare for these wellness visits, there's a whole lot to goes with that in terms of billing and putting the right codes. They do give some guidance on what's the medical codes that you use for billing. But also with that, when you start billing government healthcare programs, you're subjected to audits, your files need to be right, and all of those things. There's the HIPAA requirements for privacy, and we'll talk a little bit more about the privacy because I think that that's a big issue if we're going to look at engaging and participating in the whole lifestyle medicine movement. Okay. Any questions? Medicaid is not covered in the statute. Doesn't mean it won't be, but right now it's not covered.
Is there anything for physicians beyond Medicare? I thought that all physicians under the new plan were encouraged to include wellness.
There's encouragement, but right now the statute only pays under Medicare. So more than likely it will expand, but right now it's only Medicare services that's included. If someone will volunteer to take a sheet of paper and write down questions, and I will promise that I will get back to you on anything that I don't know the answer to. So in terms of recommending a good site, because I read the statute. So you're asking where is kind of the summary, the condensed version.
Healthcare.gov. www.healthcare.gov is the official federal government site for the HCA and implementation.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a good place to start. There are several others, but that's the best place to start.
Okay.
Did you say that you're not sure if wellness coaches will be paid under that?
I'm not sure because we're not specifically called out. So it has this category of team members, which is not defined. So I think what will happen is that we'll see some further guidance coming down the line. Like there's a lot of, and was anybody in my Sunday session? I don't think so. Okay. When I did a session on Sunday, which was a one-day intensive, and we talked about a lot of the laws that impacted worksite wellness programs. And a lot of them fell underneath the different forms of discrimination. The EEOC still has not given a lot of guidance on that. They've had forums, there's specific questions have been asked, and they basically said, we'll get back to you. So I think we'll probably start to see something similar with this particular legislation.
When is it actually going to start, that new program?
It's already started.
It's already started.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what do we need to do to prepare to work with physicians in lifestyle medicine? And the first thing I say is that you need to learn how to speak the language. If you're going to talk to physicians, you need to understand what are the things that's important to them, understand the language that they're speaking, and be able to present to them in a language that they understand. And which is why I went to do the lifestyle medicine course at Harvard's medical school, because I wanted to be able to understand some of that language. So knowing more about how their office functions will help, understanding the things that are important to them. But also, physicians work heavily underneath a lot of regulations, guidelines, and codes of conduct. And if they're going to partner with us as wellness coaches, I think we need to put a little bit more emphasis on our codes of ethics and our codes of conduct. And I'm not saying that we don't have them, but we don't have a standardized one. And there's not one single code of conduct that all of the wellness coaching industry has agreed to adopt. So typically what you have is wherever you've gotten your certification, there's usually a code of conduct that goes along with that certification. So I'm going to talk a little bit about codes of conduct, and just to start as a group, because I think the National Wellness Institute has a lot of history in wellness, and there are a lot of people here who are pioneers, and I thought this would be a good group to start talking about some of the things around the codes of ethics that we need to start to think about expanding on, developing, and forging the way for a model code of conduct in the industry. Okay. Privacy laws. We need to understand the various privacy laws that relate to patient information. Some of those laws are federal, HIPAA, and some of them are state. So whatever state you're in, you also need to be familiar with your state privacy laws. Okay. Ethics. So I started to look at the whole area of ethics and just to get some history on how a lot of these codes have been developed. And ethics, after looking at a lot of different things, I defined it as a set of moral principles, beliefs, values that guide us in making choices. And at the core of ethics is our sense of right and wrong and our belief about rights we possess and duties we owe to others. Okay. Our ethical responsibilities are influenced by both the kind of decisions that has to be made and the roles we play. And so, for instance, there are different ethical rules that might apply for a physician and a patient and a parent and a child. So it's not the same rules that apply. So whatever role we're in, that may influence our ethical obligations. If we think about a child being sick in the hospital, most people would expect that the parent would be there by the bedside. Am I right? With a physician, you don't expect the physician to stay by the bedside of their patients. At the same time, you expect a parent to screen information and decide what information do they want to give the child about their illness, because they're evaluating the child's maturity level, emotional level to be able to handle the information. And we think that that's a parent's ethical responsibility to do that, to protect the child emotionally. Whereas with physicians, they can't screen information. Their ethical obligation is to have the patient make their own choices, which means that they have to disclose the risk associated with procedures, risk associated with medication, and that's something that's in their code that they need to inform the patient. So depending upon your role, there may be different expectations. And when we're in the coaching field, we may find that we're playing various roles in coaching, and so there may be some slight difference in our ethical obligations depending upon that role. Okay. Professional ethics. What I found is that most professional organizations have a code of ethics. In order for any group to be taken seriously as a profession, there has to be an agreed upon code of ethics. And when each practitioner enters the field, they're expected to follow that code of ethics. And there's cultures of ethics within organizations. And if you don't adopt the culture, people will start to say, you're not really cut out for this. You don't fit in. So it's not necessarily what your belief is wrong. It just doesn't go along with the ethical culture. And, there are things, even like when I practice law, that I found that I didn't agree with. And so I might not have been a good fit because of what my beliefs were and what may have been acceptable as ethical conduct in the profession. So sometimes that ethical conduct is good. Sometimes that ethical conduct is bad, what's acceptable in a profession. Okay. So I've talked about that I know of, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have a single agreed upon code of ethics in the wellness industry. So I looked at moral character, that it was a combination between moral character and moral reasoning that made up our moral compass. So our character is heavily influenced by our background, and this is something too that when we're working with clients, understanding that their sense of right and wrong is going to be heavily influenced by their religion, by what they were taught when they were younger, what their clergy taught them, what their parents taught them, even their bosses. And again, sometimes I say this sense of right and wrong can be good and it can be bad. Depending upon what your parents taught you, what kind of boss you had, your boss may have taught you that unethical conduct was acceptable. And so you look at things a lot differently. So you have a lot of professions that actually do a pre-screening. You can't even get into the profession if they determine that you have a low moral character. It's not about whether or not you've broken any laws, but it's about moral character. And so a lot of professions, I know the legal profession definitely screens, they do, and if they think that your character, you can have passed the bar, gotten through law school, and not be admitted into a bar because of character issues. Moral reason is how we evaluate sets of facts, potential actions related to consequences based on our culture, our religious beliefs, and our personal ideologies. And I'm saying all of this because when we're looking at developing standard codes, we need to take in consideration all the variations in what goes in to people's reasoning and understanding that we can have codes, but there are some things that is going to rely on a person's moral character to be able to guide them through it. Okay. I talked about the reasoning. Okay, so I looked at several codes of conduct. I looked at codes of conduct in healthcare and the medical profession. I looked at the code of conduct in law. I looked at coaching, fitness, and came up with some recommendations. And I'll have to also give credit to the group on Sunday because I gave this list and they helped add to the list. But I'm going to put the list up and see if anybody has any agreements, disagreements, or additions to the list. So one was autonomy. I found that autonomy was present in a lot of the codes that respect a client's right to make their own decisions. Self-efficacy, the same similar principle. Do no harm, and that's avoiding engaging in any activity that will harm the client. You see this in a lot of the model codes for the medical industry. Fairness, treat like cases alike. Competency, and again in the wellness industry there's not a set standard of what the certification requirements are. Depending upon, you can get a certification by doing a 2-week online course or by doing a 1-year intensive course. Sexual involvement. Most of the codes mention sexual involvement. Some of them talked about inappropriate relationships with clients and did not specifically mention sexual involvement. Confidentiality, keeping information confidential, conflict of interest, disclosure of referral fees. Having clear agreements with clients, protecting the integrity of the profession, refer the clients when it is in the best interest of the client, be lawful, keep clients safe, represent qualifications accurately. And the two that were added was to avoid discrimination and conduct affairs with transparency. Any comments, suggestions?
Yeah, in the fitness industry, there is a board called the NCCA, National Council on Certifying Agencies, and say the group that I'm part of is a NCAA accredited certification. So there is standards to that certification. So I can see where the wellness industry could definitely use the same thing. In fact, they think the fitness industry is going to move into licensure soon, probably with state by state first. A lot of people think that's negative. It'll probably be a benefit because then possibly insurance reimbursements on the other side of that.
Right.
So there's a lot of, and my wife's a CPA, for example, and she always talks about how her fiduciary responsibility is much higher than, say, some other investment person because of this code of ethics. So
right.
Code of ethics is also, especially a standardized one, a very important thing for the industry because if someone doesn't practice to that code, they can be, quote unquote, disbarred or whatever the term might be. So.
Are you familiar with the work of the ICF and kind of what the ICF is doing for wellness coaching and trying to put together some, standardization of practice and things?
I am not familiar with their work with relationship to wellness coaching. I'm familiar with their work with relationship to coaching.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I hear is kind of happening is like there's all these certain kinds of coaching that may be a little more developed, such as life coaching, but wellness coaching is kind of emerging, and there's groups together to really decide what some of the ethics and some of the standardization is. But yeah, there are a lot of, like you said, programs that are more lengthy, less lengthy, less intensive, so standardization kind of isn't there at the moment. International Coaching Federation. Coach Federation.
Another organization that is the Centers for Credentialing and Education, and they now have a board-certified coach, and they actually have a wellness coach designation. So that's the Centers for Credentialing and Education board-certified coach. Okay, Centers for Credentialing and Education board-certified coach segment. And there's even beyond that, there's a wellness designation, wellness specialty. It's another organization with a code and the standards and all the good stuff.
Okay. Yes.
So, two points. One is there is another group out there, another national group that's formed a couple of years ago, the National Credentialing Commission on Coaching and Education, or something like that. Margaret Moore from Well Coaches and Michael Arwowski and a number of other folks that are the big players in the field have gotten together and been working on it for a couple of years. As an attorney, I would be interested in hearing a little bit more about number 4, fairness. It seems to me that as a coach, we need to approach each individual case as an individual case based on their needs and what they wish to work on. And I don't necessarily see that as treating each case the same way, or whatever, treating the cases alike, I guess.
Okay. You're right that each case should be done on an individual basis. But when you have situations where you have people who are similarly situated, you shouldn't be treating one differently than the other. So, which is everyone is a unique individual, but you still have categories of people who may be similarly situated. So, for instance, if you're working in a worksite wellness environment and you are giving a reward for participation in a wellness program, everyone should be able to qualify for the same reward, people who are in like situations. When you have situations where someone may not be similarly situated, like there may be a disability or there may be an age issue where they're not able to participate at the same level, then you want to be able to have some different ways for them to participate in the program. So that's what I mean when I...
Okay. I was thinking of it more from a coaching process perspective as opposed to an incentive.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we would add. Anything I would to that list, and I would definitely add protecting client records.
Protecting client records? Okay. Yeah, and that's covered underneath confidentiality.
I would, that confidentiality can be in the relationship, but I
Okay. 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 Yes.
My understanding is, and maybe this is just in California, but the law does not recognize the coach relationship as confidential.
You're talking about probably privileged, and I'm going to talk about privilege. Okay. 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 So this goes to what you were saying, records, keeping records confidential. So I want to talk a little bit about HIPAA. So if any of you worked in any healthcare facility, you have probably taken HIPAA training, and you probably do it annually. So every year you get this refresher training on how to keep client information confidential and how to protect records, whether they're paper records or whether they're electronic records. If you are going to be working with physicians, physicians are subject to HIPAA, and if that information is being exchanged, there will be an expectation that you abide by the same rules that they have to abide by with respect to HIPAA. Okay. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It was first enacted to address the uninsured issue. So it includes a lot. Depending upon what you do, you might know HIPAA for discrimination. You may know HIPAA with respect to group insurance. You may know it with respect to privacy. But it covers a lot. There's a lot of different provisions. But it limits exclusions for pre-existing conditions under group insurance. It also prohibits discrimination against employees and dependents based on their health status. It allows special enrollment opportunities under certain circumstances to enroll in like group plans. And it addresses an individual's right to purchase individual coverage if they have not had access to coverage, if they don't have access to coverage and they've exhausted their COBRA. If anybody have ever left a job, you got offered COBRA, you had to take it for 18 months. If you took it for 18 months and you had a pre-existing condition, you would automatically qualify to get enrolled it was guaranteed enrollment. If you let HIPAA lapse and you had a pre-existing condition and you tried to get individual insurance, you wouldn't be able to get it. So this is, HIPAA was designed to make sure that people had that continuation of coverage when they left their jobs. But what we're going to talk about is mainly the privacy and security issues under HIPAA. Okay? Okay. So who does it apply to? It doesn't apply to everybody. It only applies to covered entities and business associates. Okay. And a covered entity is defined as a healthcare provider, and this is the list: physicians, clinics, psychologists, dentists, chiropractors, nurses, pharmacists, and any person or organization that furnishes, bills, or is paid for healthcare service. And I want you to remember that last one. Okay? Okay. It also covers health plans. So if any of you work for wellness programs, in a corporate environment, and those wellness incentives are somehow or another connected to the group health insurance, it's going to be covered underneath HIPAA. Okay. Clearinghouses. And these are basically the entities that take billing information, put it in different forms. So there may be billing companies, companies that do reprocessing, but it's basically those companies that take that medical information and put it in a form that they can bill. Okay. A business associate is a person or entity who works on behalf of a covered entity other than an employee, who creates, receives, maintains, or transmits protected health information. Okay? Remember this one too. Okay. The goal of the privacy provisions in HIPAA was to do two things. One, it was to protect the information, but it was to do it in a manner that it didn't interfere in information being communicated where it was necessary for healthcare purposes. So it had to strike that balance between protecting information and the free exchange of information between entities that needed that information for the care of the patient. Okay. So the security provisions, the privacy provisions, relates more to paper information. The security provisions relate primarily to electronic PHI, and PHI is protected health information. It's also known as ePHI when it's related to electronic records. Okay. Whenever you have protected information, the general rule is that that authorization is required before you can disclose any of that information, and that the protection of that information survives a person's death, which means that a family member or some other qualified person has to give permission to disclose that information. That protection does not die with the individual. Okay. The client information cannot be used to create mailing lists for marketing purposes, and this is very important for us to know, because if you're getting client information, whether you're getting it from a physician or if you're considered a covered entity or a business associate, you cannot use that information to market other products to them. Okay. That's protected under HIPAA. The information is only supposed to be used for its intended purpose. Okay. If you are doing business with a physician, you might be asked to sign a business associate agreement. Anybody knows what a business associate agreement is? Had any dealings with a business associate agreement? Okay. Basically, it's an agreement that any covered entity has to have signed by anyone who they're going to transfer those records to to perform any services for them. And the purpose is to clarify and limit the permissible uses and disclosures of PHI and ePHI by any business associate. So if you're asked to sign a business associate agreement, this is typical when you're dealing with a healthcare provider, because they're required under HIPAA to have a business associate agreement signed by anyone who gets the client information. The other alternative is that they would have to get an authorization to disclose from every single client. So if they're having someone process thousands and thousands of records, they're going to get them to sign a business associate agreement. If you're being asked to work with a couple clients, they might just get a disclosure from the client. So you may have one or the other. Any questions on that so far? Everybody with me?
Could you just talk a little bit about what would be the protected health information?
Okay. Protected health information, it actually includes most things that's going to be in a patient's medical records. So it's name, it's age, it's birth dates, it's anything related to their condition. Anything that you'll find in that the list is probably, I think the list of examples has about 18 different examples, but it's a lot of the demographic information as well as conditions.
One of the things that you mentioned was that like a group insurance employee is also responsible for following these guidelines. So if a client were to put their name with some of that other information on a online competition, perhaps that was part of something, that would be then disclosed to other people if they're doing it themselves, so that's not a concern.
Right. Right. Now, if you were to take that information, if you got them to participate in a wellness program that was connected to a group health plan, and you decided you were going to publish their information, that would be a violation of HIPAA.
So, for example, if at the end there was a celebration and you announced people's names who had been winners along the way, and you didn't have a signed permission?
If they're typically you want to get their permission to disclose it, and you might do that as a part of their participation in the program. So when they're participating, you can get that agreement up front that you're not going to disclose particular information, but you will be disclosing like who's participating in it and what, who's won the competition. Okay. And I asked you to remember two things because the question I asked was whether or not HIPAA's privacy and security laws applies to wellness coaches. And typically it does not. I have not found any laws, any cases that specifically talk about wellness coaches as being a covered entity. But taking a forward-looking approach, because one of the things that I think we have to do is be prepared for where the industry is going. The definition of covered entity includes healthcare providers, okay, which is any person or organization that furnishes bills or is paid for healthcare and transmits PHI electronically. So to the extent that wellness is an essential part of healthcare, we might find that we're being included in this definition. Okay. If we're not being included in the definition of covered entity, if we're working with physicians, we may be considered an agent, an employee, or a business associate of a covered entity, which means we're also covered underneath HIPAA.
Some of the new high trust rules, I mean, it seems like the high trust rules, electronic medical records, and the extension of the HIPAA regulatory things, are going to make it really difficult. I mean, because the company or the organization has to qualify in a high trust, which is way crazy complicated. Anybody you interact with would have to have the same security, same things that you do. I mean, it seems like high trust is going to be really make it difficult to interact.
It does make it difficult. There was, I think maybe it was about 3 years ago, there was a major revisions in the HIPAA rules, in high tech, which basically increased, what it did was increase a lot of the penalties, and we're going to talk about some of the penalties, but it increased a lot of the penalties for violations of HIPAA. So underneath the electronic provisions, they are designed to be flexible, and they should be designed based upon a company's size and the potential risk. So a small business is not expected to have the same level of security as a very large business. So there is some flexibility there, but at the same time, there has to be a reasonable effort to secure that information. We know that the legislative intent is to protect PHI information gathered in the course of providing healthcare services, which whenever for lawyers, when we don't have clarity, if the statute's not clear, we go to what was the legislative intent. When I look at the legislative intent, I think that it is not a far stretch to say that wellness coaches will be covered underneath HIPAA. Penalties. I always do the penalties because I think it helps people set their priorities. When you're working with a limited budget and you're deciding what you're going to cut, I worked as a healthcare compliance officer for a number of years, a privacy officer, business ethics in healthcare, and one of the things I say is HIPAA is not one of the areas that you want to play with when you start talking about where do you want to cut. Penalties. An entity can be signed, and I should have corrected that. It should have been $10,000 to $50,000 per failure to comply with privacy rules. Okay, not to exceed $1.5 million per year. Okay, that's for each occurrence. So you decide you're going to clean up your files. You scan in. You got a new neat desk. You scan in 100 client files, decide to throw the other 100 away, multiply that by the maximum, you can easily hit $1.5 million. If that violation violates another provision of HIPAA, you can hit another $1.5 million. So if you both violate the security laws and the privacy, you can easily be up to $3 million. There was a case with Signet, where a part of HIPAA also is you got to make records available. So it's not just about the privacy, but it's also about protecting the integrity of the records and making them available. Signet, refused to, I think it was about 8 patients requested their medical records, didn't get them. The government fined them $1.3 million for failure to provide those records, and another $3 million for failure to cooperate in the investigation. $4.3 million. Criminal penalties, $50,000 to 1 year. The criminal penalties increases to $100,000 and up to 5 years if the wrongful conduct involves false pretense, and up to $250,000 and 10 years imprisonment if the wrongful conduct involves the intent to sell, transfer, or use identifiable health information for commercial advantage, personal gains, or malicious harm. Okay, so that provision you really need to be mindful of. You're working in a physician's office, you're looking through records, you say, hey, you know what, these people would be really good for this new weight loss program that I have. So let me just take these names down. And I'm going to send out to them information about my new weight loss program. Guess what? You're going to fall underneath that $250,000 and up to 10 years imprisonment because you use protected health information for commercial personal gain. And this is why I want to bring up the penalties so that you understand the importance of complying with the privacy. HIPAA does not provide for private causes of action, meaning someone cannot file a lawsuit against you for violating their privacy rights, but that doesn't mean that you won't be violating some state privacy laws, because most states have privacy laws as well. So you could have the government coming after you underneath HIPAA and an individual suing you for violation of their privacy. Okay. 46 states have security laws. Most states have privacy laws. Most states have medical records laws, which are different. So whatever state you're in, you need to be familiar with the rules relating to medical records as well. Okay. Types of information that's protected. It safeguards an individual's identifiable health information or protected health information. Security protects that the electronic version of it. Here's some tips. Email communications need to be protected. Only the minimum amount of PHI necessary should be included in any email. If it's not necessary for that person to have that information, don't include it in the email. Emails being sent to multiple recipients, you should use a blind carbon copy. You're sending out to all of your clients, don't include all of their names so everybody can see who else your clients are. Make sure you do a blind carbon copy. And you should always send your emails through some kind of encrypted method. Okay. Computer monitors, you're working on computer monitors. If you in an area where people can walk by and see the information, you want to keep it away from the public view or get a privacy screen. Verbal communication, don't do it in public. And if you have to, make sure you're not saying anything where anybody knows who you're talking about. And you have to be really careful because sometimes in small towns, what you think is not identifiable information is. There was only one car accident. You mentioned you had a client that wife was in a car accident. Everybody knows who it was. Storing and securing paper files. You want to organize your files in a way that you separate protected information. Like if you have somebody doing billing for you, don't include the patient records along with information that they need to do billing. So you want to separate them. You don't want to put a lot of information on the outside of the file, like on the outside where you have, you want to have the minimum amount of information on the outside of the file that you need in order to retrieve the file. Okay, you don't need to have condition on there, patient's height and weight, just the name. File cabinets, drawers should be locked. Faxes. A lot of misinformation goes to the wrong fax. One of the good things to do is to store fax numbers that you use a lot, and that will cut down on dialing errors. If it's a number that you're using for the first time, pick up the phone, call, and verify the number, and make sure that is the fax number. Removing files from offices, you should never take your original files out because HIPAA also requires that you protect the files, not just from disclosure, but that you maintain them. So you want to make sure you're keeping a copy of your files in your office, and you should be taking out the copy and not the original. Okay. File review, don't do it out in open. If you don't have to, don't have somebody's charts open where other people can see it. And for a lot of us, we work out of our homes. You should use the same rules in your home that you would use in an office. Keep the files in a locked file cabinet or a locked room. You may have a husband or a wife that just finds those files pretty interesting. Wow. Or you may have a teenager whose friends come by, look the files, get people's information, and you got identity theft issues. So you want to make sure you're keeping those files confidential even in your home. Okay. Disposing of files, we talked about the possible penalties when you decide you're just going to toss them in the trash. So you want to make sure that you're shredding. Use a good shredder or cross shredder. If you work in an office, they may have those shredder bins that you put information in, and then somebody else comes along and shreds them. And that includes computer disks as well. You want to shred those. You have CD disks with information on them. Get a shredder that you can shred them, but you shouldn't be tossing electronic information either. Okay, privilege. This is, I think you were asking about privilege. Yes. Yes.
One more thing about the disposal of files that both of us have talked about. If you have home offices, especially on a work site, if you have home offices, to have some sort of, if you die, well, will not be right. But when you die, you need to have some sort of way to dispose of those records so that people I know have actually included that as part of the bills.
Yeah. And that's an important part because that is an issue for a lot of practitioners, particularly solo practitioners. They have these files, they die, and then the estate have access to them, and whoever is managing their estate, they don't know what to do with those files. They're not trained in that. Having them in a storage space as opposed to one that is designed to hold and protect information. You put them in the youth store, and you don't pay your bill. And then those files are now out there in the public domain. So, yes, you do need to make those arrangements. Very good point. Privilege. This is my take on the privilege. So far, there is no recognizable privilege between a health coach, a wellness coach, and their client. And the way privilege works is that there are certain relationships that the government has determined that it's important to keep anything communicated in that relationship confidential for the integrity of the relationship. So physicians, anything told to a physician is kept confidential in the interest of treatment of the patient so the patients can talk openly. The same thing with lawyers. Want them to be able to talk openly so the lawyer can do a good defense. Clergy, it's important for people to be able to talk to their clergy. You have a spousal privilege. And that's the integrity of that relationship. If you can't talk to your spouse, who can you talk to? Right? So those relationships are relationships that are protected. In the interest of those relationships, the person who receives the communication cannot be made to disclose that information. In most states, the privilege belongs to the communicator, which means the husband tells the wife, guess what? I hit somebody today. I think I killed them and I pulled off. The wife says, that's horrible, I'm telling. She can't because the privilege belongs to the husband. She can tell, but it's not admissible in court. Yes. So the privilege belongs to the communicator. And so, so for us, do we have a privilege? We want people to be able to talk openly, but right now there is no privilege. So your agreement should definitely say that you will keep things confidential except as required by law to disclose them. Okay.
You know, most coaches don't do that, and it's just. I'm so glad you're speaking to this. We just say, "Oh, everything you say is kept confidential."
It's not. Now, I think that there's probably some real argument that, particularly if we're working through physicians, that we can probably be covered underneath their privilege. You know, the same principle happens in law, is that if a lawyer hires a private investigator, any information that that private investigator communicates back to the lawyer is considered attorney work product and is still privileged. In compliance, if we send our internal auditors out to do an audit of the company, the regulators can request that information. If the legal department requests it, they can't because it's covered underneath the lawyer's privilege.
Yeah, so I'm a bit confused. You're saying the communicator has a privilege, but if they said it to a wellness coach and you were disposed in court or whatever, asked to give testimony in court, you'd have to give it.
You have to give it.
But if you were a clergy, lawyer, or physician,
You would not.
So,
Or a spouse.
oh, yeah,
Yeah.
right, or a spouse.
Or a
So
therapist.
what is the difference?
Right.
What's that? There's a term besides privilege that they used to call it, but so certain professions have that automatically, but
Yes.
coach would not be one of them.
Coach is not one of them.
Okay, but the communicator has that. Where does that communicator have?
The communicator is the one who owns the privilege, meaning that's the person who received the information cannot waive the privilege. The only person that can waive the privilege in most states is the communicator.
Okay, now
Okay. For marketing, I didn't go into marketing, but I will say that there's a site here, Exercise is Medicine. They have a really good tool on how to approach physicians. It's the Health and Fitness Professional Action Guide, and they go with preparing professional presentations, professional preparation, presentation of marketing material, marketing yourself to physicians, marketing yourself to other healthcare providers, and getting the healthcare provider to consistently refer their patients to you. So I'm going to refer you to that in the interest of time. And so if you're serious about forging relationships with physicians, I think you should take a look at this. Okay. I also did a book. This is I actually gave the copy of this book out for the as materials for the Sunday class that I did, because that was a full day intensive. But it deals with a lot of what I talked about, and it also deals with these other issues, a lot of the laws that impact worksite wellness programs, more information on the industry, and it's not actually out yet. It's actually the pre-released copy that, and that's the lawyer in me to say pre-released. That just means I didn't fully site check it and. So, is there anybody that would want this?
I do.
So, if you are an entrepreneur and you see something that you want, what do you do?
Ask for it.
Go get it.
That's the lesson. You don't ask, you go get it. Okay, that's my contact details. And I will put the presentation up. It's actually not up yet, but I will put the presentation up so you will be able to access it. And I think we have a few more minutes, so let me open the floor to questions. Yes.
I'd like you to know that Linda is now a brand new member of the board of directors for the National Order.
Thank you.
Linda, would you recommend, or are there, is there anything out there for like liability insurance for wellness coaches? As a yoga teacher, I have liability insurance, but I work for an organization for health and wellness coaching, and I'm directly employed, so I don't know if I'm probably covered under the organization, but if I were doing independent work, would there be liability?
There is coaching liability insurance. There's a few companies that offer coaching liability insurance. I'll have to check on which ones there are. But if you go online and put in coaching insurance, and also one of the things, what's your name? Read Lori has all the stuff in the book because I got because Lori was a go-getter, but I actually cover a lot on insurance in terms of the type of insurance that you should have. And so you'll get a standard policy, you can get a standard coaching policy, but I think that there's also other insurance that you should consider, like professional liability insurance that is not going to be covered in your general liability insurance. If you're going to be doing things where you're going to be in private with people and you're going to have physical contact, you're going to have employees, I would also suggest that you get the sexual molestation insurance coverage as well, because those things will cover you for stuff that typically your general insurance will not cover you for intentional acts. Sexual molestation is considered an intentional act. The general liability covers you for negligence. So you want to get a good insurance broker and really think through what are the possible liabilities that you can have and ask, does it cover that? Because when I got my insurance for my fitness facility, I probably drove that broker crazy because I said, well, what about this? Am I going to be covered for that? Well, what about that? Well, hold on, if it's this scenario. And so there's a lot of different things that I had tacked onto my insurance. So don't be just satisfied with the standard policy.
The business associates agreement that you talked about, I imagine, does that only cover HIPAA and privacy policies with your arrangement with the doctor's office? Does it cover compensation, fees?
No. The business associate agreement only covers the confidentiality issues, and Lori has a sample one in her book. But no, really, if you have cards and you want to leave me your name, I can also upload some forms, and I will get forms to you as well. And if you want to see what a copy of a business associate agreement looks like, I can do that as well. So, yes. In about 2 weeks. If you give me your information, I will send out an email blast and say it's out and it will be available on Amazon initially. Okay. Any other questions?
If you haven't signed this form, sign it on the way out if you need to.
Okay. We got about 2 more minutes, so I'm going to ask, is there anything that anybody had a question about that was not covered? Anything that you said, you know what, that's what I came for and I didn't get it.
It's a bit of just the Hollywood dirt, but back when Britney Spears was in the hospital and some nurses or somebody released some information on her, would those people have been sued by, or not sued, but
yes, violation of HIPAA.
On the HIPAA Act.
Under HIPAA, and if they did it for some personal gain, like sold the information, they're going to be subject to that 250 up to 10 years. Yep. All right. Thank you all.